On a small rocky island off the coast of western France, Napoleon Bonaparte spent the final days of his life cut off from the world he once commanded. After his crushing defeat at Waterloo, he had hoped to flee to the United States and begin a quiet exile, but fate denied him that chance. Instead, he surrendered to the Royal Navy, which first carried him to England, and then far away to the lonely island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. From there, the former emperor of the French faded into history, yet his legacy did not die with him. For decades after his fall, the very memory of Napoleon continued to shape France, and three different monarchs struggled in vain to reconcile their rule with the enduring legacies of revolution and empire. Each one failed in the attempt. No story of France in the 19th century can be told without reference to Napoleon and the world he built. Even as he drifted into the past, his presence loomed over politics, society, and culture. After the coalition powers defeated him and restored the Bourbon dynasty, King Louis XVIII took the throne of France. He was the brother of the executed King Louis XVI, and he returned to a nation deeply scarred by revolution and war. The new king could not simply restore absolutism. France had changed too much for that. The revolution and the empire had transformed the nation's institutions, laws, and expectations. Louis understood that a complete return to the old regime was impossible, yet he still tried to claim authority in his own way. When Napoleon collapsed in 1814, the French Senate offered Louis the crown on the condition that he accept their constitution and rule as a constitutional monarch. The king, however, rejected their document and instead issued his own charter. On the surface, it looked similar to what the Senate had proposed. It promised religious tolerance, freedom of the press, and other revolutionary principles. But by presenting it as his own gift to the people, Louis made a symbolic point. Power came from the king, not from the people or their representatives. This distinction mattered. It revealed the fundamental tension of the Bourbon Restoration. Louis was a man of the old order, yet he was pragmatic enough to see that compromise was necessary. He kept many Napoleonic officials and judges in office because they had proven competent. He maintained much of the Napoleonic Code and relied on its administrative reforms to enforce royal authority. He even adopted a policy of forgive and forget toward those who had once served Napoleon. To Louis, loyalty to France was what mattered, not loyalty to the emperor. Still, the legislature of 1815 was filled with ultra-royalists, conservatives, who longed for the return of the pre-revolutionary system. They repealed progressive laws like the right to divorce and banned revolutionary symbols such as the tricolor flag. Advisors warned Louis that such heavy-handed measures would only alienate the public. Soon enough, he dissolved the legislature and turned instead to moderate royalists known as doctrinaires. For a time, Louis steered a cautious middle course, yet the contradictions of his reign never disappeared. On one side were reactionaries, who wanted to erase all traces of revolution and empire. On the other side were liberals, republicans, and Bonapartists, who clung fiercely to the ideals of 1789 and the glory of Napoleon. The king could not satisfy both camps. His legitimacy was shaky, and many French people openly undermined the Bourbon regime. Although the monarchy adopted some revolutionary changes, it rejected many more. Only the richest 1% of men were allowed to vote. The Catholic Church returned as a powerful ally of the crown and worked to instill traditional royalist values. Censorship was strict. Any endorsement of Napoleon, whether spoken or written, was treated as a crime. Even suggesting a change in the succession of the throne was considered treason. The Bourbons even instituted a national day of mourning for the execution of Louis XVI, presenting the revolution as a national sin that required atonement. Yet the people did not forget Napoleon. In fact, the occupation of France by Allied troops after 1815 only deepened resentment and fueled patriotic nostalgia for the fallen emperor. He came to embody freedom, self-determination, and the spirit of the common man. Against him, the Bourbons seemed like a foreign yoke imposed on the nation. The cult of Napoleon spread quickly. People celebrated his birthday in secret. They flew tricolor flags from church towers in defiance of the monarchy. Rumors circulated about his miraculous return. Songs praised his victories. Children were even said to cry, "Long live the emperor," at birth. The tension spilled into violence. Royalist mobs hunted down supposed traitors after Waterloo killing Jacobins, Republicans, Bonapartists, and even Protestants. Prominent Napoleonic generals were assassinated. Liberals, meanwhile, staged uprisings in Grenoble and Lyon, and even plotted against foreign leaders, such as the Duke of Wellington. Secret societies sprang up across Europe, spreading liberal and revolutionary ideas. The conservative monarchies of the Congress of Vienna grew paranoid, convinced that they faced an international conspiracy of radicals. In France, the situation grew worse after 1820, when the Duc de Berry, the king's cousin, was assassinated by a Bonapartist. Some radicals openly celebrated his death and even called for the assassination of the king. Politically, however, the murder produced a backlash. Ultra-royalists seized control of the legislature and soon dominated almost every seat. They launched the so-called expedition of the 100,000 Sons of St. Louis to intervene in Spain and restore its king against a liberal parliament. Liberals in France opposed the war, waving tricolour flags and urging soldiers to mutiny, but the ultras won the day and claimed victory. Louis XVIII died in 1824, and his brother Charles X inherited the throne. Charles abandoned moderation altogether. He openly despised liberalism and the legacy of the Revolution. His policies attempted to roll back decades of progress. Voting rights were narrowed even further to favor ultra-royalists. Émigrés who had fled France during the Revolution were compensated financially for their losses, enraging those who considered them traitors. The Catholic Church expanded its influence in schools and universities, and in 1825, a new law made blasphemy and sacrilege crimes punishable by death. Even some conservatives balked at this extremism. The tide began to turn. Liberals gained strength in the 1827 elections, weakening the ultra-monopoly on power. But Charles was unwilling to compromise. In 1830, he appointed a reactionary ministry, and when Parliament rejected it, he responded by dissolving the legislature, restricting the press, and further curbing suffrage. These ordinances ignited the July Revolution of 1830. For 3 tense days, the people of Paris rose against the monarchy. Driven by Republican patriotism and anti-clerical anger, they forced Charles to abdicate. The victory of the revolutionaries was swift. The throne passed to his cousin Louis Philippe, who was proclaimed King of the French, not King of France, a subtle but important distinction that emphasized his claim to rule with the people rather than above them. At first, Louis Philippe seemed to represent the triumph of constitutional liberty. He styled himself the citizen king and sought to reconcile France's 3 great legacies, the old regime, the revolution, and the empire. He promoted patriotism as the glue that would unite the nation. Versailles was turned into a museum celebrating French history. Napoleon's remains were returned from St. Helena in a grand ceremony, designed to bind the nation together under the banner of French greatness. For a moment it seemed as though the cycle of division might finally end, but the legacy of Napoleon and the Revolution continued to inspire opposition. Workers in Paris struggled with poverty and demanded change. The middle class demanded a broader franchise. Republicans dreamed of a new republic that would truly embody the principles of 1789. Louis Philippe, though more liberal than his predecessors, still ruled within the narrow confines of monarchy and failed to satisfy these demands. By 1848, discontent boiled over once more. Demonstrations and riots erupted. Within weeks, the monarchy collapsed, and a second republic was born. And at its head, in short order, stood another Napoleon, this time Napoleon III, who rode to power on the name of his uncle and the enduring force of Bonapartist legend. The story of France after Waterloo is not simply a tale of kings and ministers. It is the story of a nation haunted by its revolutionary past and by the towering figure of Napoleon. Every monarch who attempted to rule in his shadow faced the same challenge. Could monarchy coexist with the principles of liberty, equality, and national pride unleashed by 1789 and magnified by the empire? Time and again the answer was no. The old regime could not be resurrected, and the compromises of moderation never lasted. The memory of Napoleon remained too powerful, the revolution too deeply ingrained. France was forever changed, and no king could undo it.